Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Get Ready for IAS 2025, a webinar on how to write a conference abstract organized by the Journal of the National AIDS Society. My name is Alberto Rossi, and I'm the managing editor of the Journal of the National AIDS Society. Together with me will join slightly later Anna, who is also an employee at the International AIDS Society and editor of the journal. During this webinar, we will give you an overview on how to write a good abstract and what are the most important elements that should be included in an abstract. At the end of this webinar, there will be a survey, and we would appreciate if you could take 1 or 2 minutes to complete this survey. It will help us to understand how we can improve in the future events. For those of you that will need to leave before the end of the webinar, we will soon share the link in the chat so you can complete and give us your feedback. Thank you. So before we go deep into how to write an abstract, we'll give you a quick overview of the journal. The Journal of the National AIDS Society is an open access peer-reviewed journal. Our aim is to provide a platform for dissemination of essential HIV research, to encourage submission from low and middle income countries, and to provide capacity building opportunities for less experienced authors, such as the webinar that we are doing now. We are an open access journal, which means that everyone can access our articles for free. There is no fee to pay. All you need is an internet connection. We are indexed in the major repositories. We are a multidisciplinary journal, meaning that we cover all the HIV science, from clinical science to behavioral science. And again, as I mentioned before, we also provide skills building opportunities for young researchers. So this is the agenda of the workshop today. We're going to give you a quick overview of the abstract structure, and then we're going to go deep into each of these sections and provide you recommendations for each of these sections. We'll provide some recommendations for the language on HIV, and then we'll give you an overview of the process for submission and review and selection of the abstracts for the IAS 2025 conference. And at the end, there will be a Q&A session. So we kindly ask you to either post your questions now during the webinar so we can take a look at them and respond later, or you can post directly them later during the Q&A session. So here is how I would like to start giving you this quote. The key to writing a good manuscript is to tell a story. And what we're going to try to do is to convince you that in order for your abstract to be to catch the interest of the readers, you don't simply need to put together a few pieces of data and a few sentences. You need to create a story. There needs to be a logical flow so the reader can understand, the study that you completed. So what is an abstract? A conference abstract includes all the important details and data from your research study. And the key information here is that your abstract should be a standalone summary of the work. What does this mean? It means that even though most of the time an abstract is submitted together with an article, a full article, you want to make sure that the abstract is independent, can stand alone from the full study. And this will allow the reader to read it and understand exactly what you did. Of course, the full manuscript will provide more details, but it's important that the reader, once reading only the abstract, will understand what you did in your study. It's the section of the paper, if it comes together with the paper, that should convey the most interesting and most important parts of your work. And here is how the abstract is structured. There's a title, there's introduction, methods, results, and conclusion. So it's basically a mini paper. You'll see that introduction, methods, results, and conclusion are common to most of the articles. The full articles will also have the discussion, of course, but it's basically a mini paper. And in the next few slides, we'll give you recommendations for each of these 5 sections. So during this webinar, we'll give you the opportunity to interact a little bit with us. And to do so, we have a few questions. So we ask you to use the poll functionality in Zoom. And the responses are anonymous, so please don't be shy. We're here to learn. So the first question is, what is the most important part of a conference abstract? Is it the title, the introduction, the methods, the results, or the conclusions? Okay, we'll give you another 15, 20 seconds to think and respond. Again, the responses are anonymous, so don't be shy. Okay, 5 more seconds. All right, I'm going to end the poll, and you should be able now to see the results. If not, we'll tell you. So 45% of you indicated that the title is the most important part of the abstracts. And we do agree with those of you that indicated the title. The reason why the title is the most important part of the abstract is because if your title doesn't catch the attention of the reader will not invest additional time to read the full abstract. So you can have the most, the best written abstract, but if the title doesn't catch the attention of the reader, no one will read it. And in the next slide, we'll show you how to write a good title. And I believe now Anna has been able to join the team. Hi, Anna.
Hi, Alberto.
Okay.
Good day, everybody. How are you? So I'm going to pick up where Alberto left off and spend some time, as he mentioned, walking through each component of the abstract. So we've now worked out that the title is the most important thing, mostly because this is the thing that everybody is going to read for sure. It is also sometimes the hardest thing because you would like to tell a story with your title, but you need to remember that when you're submitting a scientific abstract, you have some very important things you want to communicate to your reader. And so it's really critical within your title that you have the W words. And what I mean by the W words is that you've answered what, where, who, and how within the title. And those are components that we look for in any title, both in a scientific manuscript, but also in the abstract. You also want to make sure that it is not overly long. So you want it to be short and to the point and just get across the information that you need the reader to have. So if you go to the next slide, and we're going to use this article for most of our workshop today, we would like you to think about what information this title contains. So the title is Gestational Weight Gain and Adverse Birth Outcomes in Women with HIV on Antiretroviral Therapy and Without HIV, a prospective cohort study. So if we go to the next and we'll launch our second poll, read through this title and think about what is missing. Can you see the what? Can you see the where? Can you see the who? And can you see the how in this title? And I just want to thank Mandlala et al. For this paper in the journal. We have made some edits for the purposes of our workshop. And so just beware of that we're using it as a great example. And so sometimes we've edited it for different reasons. So again, which information is missing from this title? Gestational weight gain and adverse birth outcomes in women with HIV on ART and without HIV, a prospective cohort study. I'm going to try and wait till at least half of you have voted. Okay, that's half. Thank you very much. And you'll see that the where is missing from this study title. And so if you look at the next slide, in the title that I shared you, we talked about what? We were looking at gestational weight gain and adverse birth outcomes. We talked about who, or the study population of interest, and this was women living with HIV on treatment and those without HIV. And we talked about the study methodology or the research method design, and it was a prospective cohort study. But we don't have where here. However, the authors did include where in their title, and that's here in orange. And you'll see the full title included that this was on gestational weight gain and adverse birth outcomes in South Africa. So this is just a good example and a good sense check that you can do with your title. Does it have the W words? What, who, where, and how? So moving on to how to write the introduction section. The introduction is the first part of your abstract. And given that you're going to have a word limit with your abstract, I would say that an introduction in an abstract is often only 2 or 3 sentences. So you really need to get to the point here. And fortunately, if you think about it as 3 sentences, you can break it down as the first sentence being about the topic, some background overall. The second being the issue or the challenge or what you were looking to understand. And the third and the final sentence of any good introduction is the aim. What was the study set up to do? And I think that this structure for an introduction makes a lot of sense. And often when I'm reading an abstract, the first part that I'll read after the title is the final sentence of the introduction, because this should really be your study or your research question. So the topic, you start a little bit broad. It's almost like a inverted triangle. So it could be around differentiated service delivery in West and Central Africa. What was the issue? You could be looking at scale of DSD, if we were sticking with that example. And the aim could be to assess how many people were accessing DSD. But you're going to go from a little bit broader down to the specifics of your study question. Next slide. So here we're back with Mandlala et al. And I'm going to read this out loud, and I want you to start thinking, what is missing? And remember, we're looking for topic, issue, and aim. So outside of pregnancy, evidence shows that persons with HIV initiating or switching to dolutegravir-based ART experience greater weight gain compared to those on other ART classes. However, there are few data on the impact of DTG-based ART on gestational weight gain in sub-Saharan Africa, where HIV is most common. According to the National Academy of Medicine, gestational weight gain below and above NAM guidelines is associated with birth outcomes. So again, I'm looking for you to think about what's missing. Do you know the topic? Do you know the issue? And do you know the aim? Or do you think that we have cleverly deleted a sentence from this introduction? Great. Give it a couple more seconds. Okay, so you can see here, if we end the poll, that the majority of you also thought that the aim was missing. So the first sentence was framing. It was really around the topic overall, so you knew what was coming. The issue was, what is the challenge? And we got some degree of specificity in terms of talking about how this affects people in sub-Saharan Africa. And then next, you'll see that we cleverly, for now, if you go to the next slide, had deleted the aim. And so the authors are very clear here. They say that the objective of this study was to describe gestational weight gain by HIV status in ART regimen and examine the associations with adverse birth outcomes. And so that, like I said, if you want to go straight to the heart of the matter, at the end of your introduction, you should have this sentence. I will just want to pause here for a second and say, we are showing you today the abstract from a manuscript published in the Journal of the International AIDS Society. And they have quite a few words here in their introduction, and that's probably because they have a little bit more of a word limit within the journal specifications. So we'll get into that in a little bit, but generally you won't have a lot of words to use in your introduction. So you really need to be short and to the point: topic, issue, aim. Now we're going to shift gears and talk about the methods section. The methods section is probably my favorite, because the methods section as an epidemiologist is really important for me to know, did you do the right thing to answer your objective? And if your methods are incorrect, then what you found is not valid. So it's really important that you spend more of your words on your methods. Also, the method section for me is generally the easiest to write because you know what you did, and so you can describe it quite clearly. And you can also write your methods section before your research is done, because you're really just describing or giving the recipe to the reader in terms of what your actions were. Really importantly with the methods section as well is that it's past tense. So you're describing something that has happened. And so this is something that I always look for. And I can find slightly frustrating if it's not written in the past tense. And basically, you want to make sure you have within your methods section more of the details of those W words. So who was the research done on, what was done, how was it done, where and when. And so we can look at those examples one by one. So what was the subject, or who were the study participants? Okay. The next would be what in terms of what was measured. And here you want to give a fair amount of detail when you can, because people may want to do the same research as you later in a different population. So you're wanting to describe what were your variables, and how did you measure those variables. In terms of the how, you have a number of questions. How did you recruit people? How did you sample them? How was it designed? How did you analyze the data? So all of this information needs to be in the methods section, and in an abstract, you're going to write a brief summary of the how. The where is quite obvious, but you want to talk about potentially not just the country, but a higher degree of specificity in terms of where. And then the when is also important. When did your study start? And when did you stop recruitment? And when did you start your data analysis? So this time frame is helpful because we want research that happened recently, not research that is maybe a bit outdated. Let us look now at the methods section for Malala et al. Apologies. Again, you're getting used to this now. We're trying to work out what sort of information might be missing from this methods section. So listen to and see if we can answer all the W words from this excerpt. So we enrolled pregnant women with HIV and without HIV in a peri-urban primary healthcare facility in Cape Town, South Africa. You guys should all be thinking about the same W word now. So gestational weight gain was measured at 24 and 28 and 33 to 38 weeks gestation, and converted to gestational weight gained rate in accordance with NAM guidelines. GWGZ scores were generated using the Intergrowth 21 and US standards to account for differing lengths of gestation. Birth outcome data were obtained from medical records. Associations of GWGZ score with adverse birth outcomes were assessed using multivariate, linear, or log binomial regression. So we're going to bring up the poll question. From this excerpt, do you know who was in the study? Do you know how they were recruited, or how the variables were assessed, what data was collected? Do you know where it happened? Do you know what was done? And do you know when? And again, you see they've done a pretty good job here in not so many words, answering at least 4 of those 5 questions. And you'll remember from the previous slide, there was the scales where you're trying to give as much detail as you can, given your challenges with word count. So it's really a bit of a balancing act here. Just waiting for a few more of you to vote. Let's get that up to a pass rate. Can you tell who, how, where, what, and when? All right, so yeah, 80% of you said you really can't tell when. Some of you might have liked to know a little bit more of how, and I appreciate that. There's often not the words to do that within an abstract, but we don't know when it happened. So here you'll see that we've taken the highlighting, and we can see who, where, what, and how. And then if we hit next, you'll see we have taken out the time frame. So we put the authors did actually include the study duration, the study period. Okay, I'm going to hand back over to Alberto and see you in a few slides. Thanks.
Thank you, Anna. So we now know from the introduction what the topic and issue and aim are. We know how, where, when, what you did. Now it's finally time for us to know what the results are. So the abstract, again, is a short summary, so it should only include the key findings of your study. So if you measure 10 different things, you will not have the space to include all those 10 different things. So it's important that you think with your co-authors, what are the most relevant results to respond to your research question. Make sure you present your data in a way that it's scientifically correct. So we don't want to see words such as some, many, few, a lot, because these are not terms that convey scientific information. You want to make sure that you specify exactly in the quantity of the data that you collected. And if this data is supported by statistical analysis, you must include the results of your statistical analysis. It's not sufficient for you to say group A was larger than group B. We want to know exactly how larger and what was the statistical analysis that supported that difference. And then, so in abstracts for publications, most of the time, almost always, you do not have the possibility to include graphs or tables or images. Some conferences do allow that, and because IAS 2025 will allow the inclusion of table, graphs, and pictures in the abstract, we will discuss briefly this. So think about whether it's easier for the reader to understand the results if they are reading those or if they are seeing those results from a table or from a graph. So you have to choose whether you want to describe your results or you want to use a picture or a graph to show them. It's important, however, that you do not duplicate your results. Don't use a text to write your results and a table to show your results. So overall, in your results, you want to make sure that you do not repeat the methods. You have already described those in the previous section. You don't want to discuss your results because that's will be done later in the conclusions to a certain amount. Don't speculate on your results and be precise. Importantly, use the past tense, same as the methods. This is things that have already been completed, so you want to use the past tense. Here again, we're using the same article to show you, a good or bad, you tell us, example of results. So we will read together this section, and then we're going to ask you what you think this result section looked like. So among participants, 48% women with HIV, median age was about 29 years. Median pre-pregnancy body mass index, BMI, was 31 kilograms per square meter, interquartile range 26 to 36, and 20% were primoparos at baseline. The median weekly rate of gestational weight gain was less than 1 kilogram per week, 35% at GWG below NAM standards. The majority were women with HIV, and 48% at GWG above NAM standards, 36% women with HIV. Women with HIV gain weight more slowly than women without HIV. Weekly rate of GWG did not differ by ART regimen, DTG-based ART, 0.25 versus FRE-NETS-based ART, 0.27 kilograms per week. So here's the question. Are the results being discussed? Are the data not specific enough? Or nothing? This is a perfectly written result section. We'll give you time to reread a little bit this and think about this. Again, this is anonymous, so don't be shy. Okay, see that a lot of people are still thinking. 10 more seconds, maybe. Okay, let's reach 50% of people attending that respond to the poll. Almost there. All right, we can end the poll, and the results are 34% of you indicated that results are being discussed. 46% of you indicated that the data are not specific enough, and 20% of you indicated nothing. This is a perfectly written result section. So this seems like was a bit more difficult than the previous questions. So let's look together at this. Okay, so the correct answer is the data are not specific enough. And here we show why. So we started by saying among participants, but we didn't even, so again, this was intentionally adapted, modified for the purpose of this webinar. So the authors have used the correct version of this, of course. So we started, without saying how many participants there were. So this is obviously not acceptable. And then we said about 29 years. And this is not specific enough. You want to use a statistic. So in this case, is the interquartile range 25 to 33. And then again, we used was less than 1 kilogram per week. Of course, 0.3 is less than 1 kilogram. So technically this is correct, but it's not specific enough. It's not specific to the point that you should be using in a scientific abstract. We can go again, you can see that missing statistic or missing complete piece of data. So again, the take-home message here is that you're making a statement and you want to support your statement with quantitative data and with the statistics that can support your statement. Okay, and then we're gonna take a little detour and we're gonna talk about sex and gender analysis, because this is key for research nowadays, and as well as for abstracts submitted to the conference, the upcoming IAS conference. So it's important that you integrate into your research and research design and research question sex and gender. There's plenty of literature showing that this is key piece of information, and we recommend that you follow this recommendation. Some examples are being shared in the chat, so we suggest that you bookmark those links. So you want to make sure that you specify who your study participants are, indicate the sex and the gender. If it's a single sex or single gender study, you should specify why. And then when you report the data, make sure that you report the data in a disaggregated way. So the reader can see how many males or females or how many women and men there were in your study. Was there any effect of gender? So if you find an overall result, we also encourage you to look at whether this overall result apply equally to male and female, for example. And as I mentioned before, there are certain guidelines that we recommend you follow, and these have been shared in the chat. So please bookmark those. And then briefly on figures and tables. So as I mentioned before, normally for scientific articles in journals, you're not allowed to include graph or tables. But some conferences do allow that, such as the IAS conferences. So first thing for you to do is to carefully check the submission guidelines, either for the conference or the journal you're submitting your article to. And then the second question for you is, does it make sense for you, excuse me, does it make sense for you to use graph, tables, or text? What's the best way to convey your message? And to go a bit more in details about IAS 2025, we do allow, as I mentioned, inclusion of tables and figures. You can include up to 2, and each take a certain amount of space from the permitted space for the abstract. So here is an example of data, and the question is whether should we use a table to present this data, or should we simply describe this data as part of the results? So you can see, for example, here that we have a table that shows socio-demographic characteristics, male and female, 49% and 51%, and then data from the 5 continents. So what do you think it's easiest? And not only easiest, but what takes the least amount of space in your abstract? The table or a simple sentence that says, workshop participants were gender balanced and geographically representative. So I did the math for you. The table will take up 35 words according to the guidelines of the conference, whereas the sentence, which is conveying exactly the same message, probably in a simpler way, it's only taking 7 words. So in this case, we would recommend that this piece of data is presented in the text. So let's now see a slightly more complicated example. And again, we're going to use a poll so you can think and reflect and then tell us what you suggest. So here we have a table on the left or a graph on the right. We're asking you, what do you think is the best way? Think about how much space this takes and how simple it is for the reader to quickly, logically understand your data. Okay, let's try to get again to 50% list people voting. All right, you got it. So in this case, we have 30 people saying that the table is better, and 70% of the people said that graph is better. We do recommend in this situation to use the graph because it's more intuitive and it will take less time for the reader to see exactly the distribution of those job categories. Okay, so we have the title, we have the introduction, methods, we know the results, and now it's time to wrap up the full story in the conclusions. So these are the key points of your conclusion. Must reflect data as presented in the abstract. And this is important because, as we mentioned before, most likely the abstract does not include all the findings of your study, but their conclusions must reflect specifically, exclusively, the data that you have included in the abstract. You cannot put in the conclusion something that you have not shown the results for. And then you want to complete your conclusions with a take-home message. What are the implications of these results? And what are recommendations and future research that you encourage the scientific community to undertake? You don't have space, so make sure that you don't include obvious statements, repetition of the results, or overgeneralization. Again, the space, it's important. You cannot go beyond that, so there is no reason for you to put obvious statements. The reader will, think about those, alone. And here is, again, the same article, the abstract of that article, and we're going to read it together, and then we're going to ask you whether you think this is a good conclusion section or not. So, despite slower gestational weight gain among women with HIV, nearly half of all women gain weight faster than recommended by the NAM. Gestational weight gain was positively associated with infant birth weight. Interventions to support healthy gestational weight gain in sub-Saharan Africa are urgently needed. So the question is this a good conclusion section? Yes or no? And let's say 40% of you voted. If I remember correctly, this is the last poll question, so please do vote. All right, we have 51 people that voted. Results say that 44% of you indicated yes, this is a good conclusion section. 55% of you indicated no. And we do agree that this was a difficult question. So let's see why. So this is a real example published in our journal, but we would all agree that every article, every abstract has some room for improvement. In fact, we think that this is a good conclusion, but it could be improved. So let's see why. So there is a take-home message, which is the fact that women with HIV weight gained faster than the recommendation from the NAM, and that this gestational weight gain was positively associated with infant birth. Infant birth weight, sorry. And then the recommendations is that interventions to support healthy gestational weight gain in sub-Saharan Africa are urgently needed. As you can see here, there is no implications of the results. So the authors, could have probably, used a few more words to say, what does this imply? What, the results that they found, what does it imply for the, for the context. And then another thing that we would recommend, be improved is the second sentence. You can see that it doesn't really say whether this is a good or bad outcome. The fact that it was associated with infant birth weight, does it mean, underweight? Does it mean normal weight? Does it mean overweight? So I think, as a conclusion, the authors here could have been a bit more specific. Again, it's a real example, so this is what it is. If you read the full article, you will clearly understand what the authors meant with this conclusion section. But remember what we said at the beginning. The abstract is a standalone piece. So the reader should not first read the full article to clearly understand what the abstract means. And let me see how we're doing in time. So we do have, this example that is from another article, completely different type of study that we think better show how a conclusion section should be written. We will not have the time to go through this, in details, but the team has shared in the chat the link to this article, and we recommend that you check the abstract, and you'll see that clearly the authors here have put the take-home message, what does this imply, and what they recommend for the future research. So this we would call a very good example of an abstract conclusion section. And I believe I'm now back. It's now back with, no, it's also still me, sorry. So it's just a quick recap of the structure of the abstract that we've gone through in this previous slides. So introduction, you want to specify the topic, the issue, and the aim. Remember that triangle or that invert, that funnel that Anna described at the beginning. The methods, where you respond to those 5 specific questions: who, how, where, what, and when. The results, the key findings, that are specific to the research question of your study, and the conclusions, which is a recap of the take-home messages, implication, and recommendations for future research. And now it's, yes, back with Anna. Thanks.
Great. So to date, I think that most of the content that Alberto and I have covered is somewhat generic towards scientific articles and scientific abstracts. And now we want to get a little bit more into some of the detail that is maybe specific to the International AIDS Society, but we think are good lessons beyond just submitting to our conferences or to the Journal of the International AIDS Society. The first thing that we want to highlight is the importance of language, and that language matters. And you can see here this excerpt from the IAS site, I believe, where language shapes beliefs and may influence behaviors. Considered use of appropriate language has the power to strengthen the global response to the HIV epidemic. And we subscribe to this idea, and we very much want to fall in line with the latest best practice around evidence and the idea of putting people first. So talking about people before we talk about their vulnerabilities, before we talk about what infections they might be living with, etc. And so it's really important when you write your work to consider putting the person first, and therefore we really recommend not using the following words, not talking about HIV infected people, not talking about people who are infected, not talking first and foremost about cases or carriers, and putting the person first. So you'll see here that we have a list of do use and don't use. These are some of the recommendations from the IAS. And in general, you'll note that we want to talk about the person before we talk about other things. So this is kind of just a guidebook from us, and we have links to other resources in terms of language. And these links and resources are also available on the IAS 2025 platform in terms of on our website for the conference, discussing what we're looking for in abstracts. So that's some food for thought. In addition, around language, we also are writing for a specific audience. So remember, you're telling a story, but you're telling it as a scientist. And so we want you to keep that in mind. We encourage an active voice. We encourage sentences to not begin with it, and not to use nouns when you can use verbs instead. And these are just some examples. So Instead of saying a paper on dolutegravir and weight gain was published in 2024 by Dr. Smith, you could just say Dr. Smith published a paper on dolutegravir and weight gain. So it's really about getting to the point and using simple and succinct language. Next slide. These are just some common mistakes that we see, as well as some good practice. So it's really important, and I don't even think you're actually going to be able to submit an abstract that has too many words. So make sure you watch your word count. Keep your audience in mind. This means that you need to understand who your reader is. And in the context of the International AIDS Society Conference on HIV Science, this is an international audience. So if you're writing a paper from where you're sitting today, I'm sitting in South Africa today, I shouldn't presume that my reader knows everything about South Africa. So take that into consideration when writing your abstract. Again, I think we've talked a little bit about being clear and concise, and then some obvious things around checking for grammatical errors and sticking to the guidelines. It is really common that someone forgets to put the aim of their study very explicitly in the introduction section, and I can't stress how important that is. Sometimes it's only obvious to me after I read the methods section, and I just wish they'd said the aim right up front, so be sure to do that. Again, make sure you are using the majority of your word count on your methods and results section, so don't leave out important things in the methods. Importantly, you can't put in a result if you haven't told someone that you were going to do it in the methods section. So always balance those things out. And be a little bit humble when you write your conclusion section. So don't over-exaggerate the importance of your findings or how life-changing they're going to be. In the same way, don't overgeneralize. I also just wanted to include a slide on artificial intelligence. We will let you, it's important that we know that all of our abstracts, we appreciate that people are using this more and more, but acknowledge that for the majority of us, we're using databases and AI tools that are slightly out of date, meaning that the data that they're being trained on isn't the most recent, and you're wanting to publish recent science. We do also know and have on hand software that can detect AI-generated language, so be careful with using that. And similarly, we also do check all of the abstracts that are submitted for plagiarism. So please make sure you understand what plagiarism is and that you're not plagiarizing any of your work. I think we're now getting into some of the details. So someone already asked, and I hope I'm going to answer it in your questions, or answer this question in this section, is the specifics around IAS 2025 abstracts. This is a conference that will be happening in Kigali, Rwanda, the third week of next July. And abstracts are already open, so you can already make your IAS profile if you don't have one already and go and read more. But let me talk to you a little bit about what we're looking for in terms of IAS abstracts. The first is just to say that all of our abstracts are reviewed by peer reviewers. So it's not just Alberto and I, for example, that look at all the abstracts. It's your peers in the scientific community, and it's their scores that determine whether or not your abstract is accepted. We've already passed the 20th of November important date. That was when we launched our abstract submissions, and they will close promptly on the 22nd of January for normal abstracts. And then we'll open again on the 8th of April for 2 weeks for people to submit late breakers. Just remember, late breakers are only for breaking science or science that you couldn't have submitted by the 22nd of January. So for the majority of us, it's the 22nd of January. That's that most important deadline. Next slide. We also have, and this is just to familiarize you with the website, you could obviously search IAS 2025 in abstract, and you can see all the details there. But what I wanted to get to on the next slide, I think, is that there are two options, and these are two structures for abstracts submitted to the IAS conference. The first is the traditional kind of setup that we've already spoke about with a background, methods, results, conclusion. And this is suitable for research in all disciplines, both quantitative and qualitative. And also we have a second option that is more for lessons learned through programs, policy, or project implementation, or management. So we are also accepting abstracts that have a background, a description, a lessons learned, and a conclusion. So the first question you'll be asked is which option you are submitting to when you submit your abstract. Next slide. I've gone over most of this with you, but I just want to say that you'll also have to choose a track category and subcategory. That's quite easy. And it should go without saying, but you really want to make sure that all of your authors have approved the final abstract. Next slide. Here's the subcategory or the tracks, and then there's subcategories within these. You can use these as a reference, but we accept all types of science relating to the HIV response. And then here is what I wanted to talk about. So you're going to have a peer review by hopefully at least 3 peer reviewers on your abstract, and they're looking for the quality of the science submitted. These scores are then sent to the track committees, who again are your peers. They're scientists and people working in the HIV response. And it's those track committees that build the oral abstract sessions and determine who gets oral posters and who gets orals, oral posters, and posters. I want to share some data now just quickly to let you know that we have a very competitive submission process for the IAS conference. But before we get to that, here's what I was talking about in terms of what we asked the reviewers to look for. So we're option 1 and 2, we need them to define a clear background and an objective. We've talked about that in terms of the aim. Then we want to make sure that the methodology is sound, it's appropriate, that the results are clearly presented, the conclusions reflect what was reported in the results, and that the study is contributing original research to the field. That's the traditional abstract. On the other side, we're wanting to make sure that the abstract is appropriate in the methods, that they share lessons learned or best practices clearly, again, that the conclusion is based on the results, and that the work is original. So these are the questions that you want to make sure you've answered in your abstract, and this is what we ask the peer reviewers to score against. So in 2023, which is obviously 2 years ago, we had 3,800 abstracts, of which just over 2/3 or 37% were accepted. And you can see that that acceptance rate varied from 34% up to 60% in track A. And so just to say, for every 3 abstracts submitted, 1 is accepted to the conference. So it's very competitive. The next thing I wanted to just highlight is that it's very, very competitive when we look at it in more detail. So the purple here is the people that had e-posters. The green is people that had printed posters in the poster exhibition. And just 6.5% of those abstracts were oral, okay? So it's very rare, and you can see that it's only about 20 people that had an oral abstract per track category. So just keep this in mind, and obviously we're all aiming for oral abstracts, but I just want to highlight that it's a very competitive process. Then this is just the data on late breakers. So there was almost 400 late breakers with 25% accepted. So just note that the majority of abstracts are not late breakers, right? Again, just to emphasize, this has to be for research that couldn't have met the 22nd of January deadline. Next slide. I also just want to say that scholarship applications are also now open, and the scholarship program is very important to us at the IAS because we want to make sure that we're providing access to as many people as possible to join us in person in Kigali and present their science. So we do look very favorably upon scholarship applicants that have posters and abstracts accepted. And again, maybe you're not quite ready to write your abstract, but you could definitely get started on your scholarship application. So go ahead and check this out online and learn more about the various components that we need you to include in your scholarship application. And I believe that's the last slide. And now you're turning over to Alberto and I to answer some questions. I wanted to flag for a first question that the order within the abstract, I think, is actually quite important. So someone asked, do I have to show it in this order? I think it's important for the introduction that you start with something general and end with your aim. I also think in your results, it's important that you talk first to your primary objectives and then your secondary objectives. So maybe there's a little bit more flexibility within the order of your methods. But at least for the intro and results, I would stick to kind of what we shared today in terms of the traditional structure of an abstract. Alberto, I don't know if you want to speak briefly maybe about qualitative papers, or if there was something else that you picked up from reviewing the questions.
This is very interesting, because I'm looking at the questions now, and there are indeed multiple people that are asking for more information about qualitative research. Well, first thing I will say, please do respond to the feedback that you're going to see, to the survey that you're going to see at the end of this workshop. And, please do say that you would like to see more, information about qualitative research. That will prompt us to maybe possibly in the future either include a section dedicated to qualitative research, or organize a workshop specifically for qualitative research. Yes, you can include qualitative research. We do in JIAS, we do accept articles that are qualitative. I must say it's a bit tricky in an abstract, because qualitative research, its intrinsic value is on the quotes, on the and so it's a bit more difficult to shrink those into the abstract. There are examples in our publications of purely or mixed method studies. Maybe what we can do for future webinars, we can provide examples of those. Unfortunately, in 1 hour, we cannot go through every type of research, but we'll make sure to include some recommendations for you to look at for qualitative research. And then before I'll hand it over back to you, Anna, there was a question that I wanted to answer live. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, so there was a question about what we consider being a threshold for novel data or outdated data. The answer is that we don't have a specific date. It's not that anything that is referring to before, let's say 2020 or 2022 or 2018, it's old, and anything after is novel. Reality is you have to check how much data there is specifically in that context. And I'll give you an example. So if you're doing a study in a country X, and the most recent data in that country is from 2020, well, that data is new. If the same study is done in a different country where there is data from 2023, well, in that case, the data from 2020, it's very old, because there is now newer data in that country. So again, we cannot make a specific, you cannot draw a specific line, but you have to look at, in that context, what is the most recent data that we have, and then you can see whether it's, it's a relative, novel or relative old concept.
So I just wanted to say scholarships are open to anybody. So you don't have to be an author to apply for a scholarship, and you can apply for a scholarship at any time. There is different ways in which we review also the scholarship applications. You can imagine if 1 in 3 abstracts is getting accepted, that there's also a huge number of people applying for scholarships. And so what we're wanting to see is both a combination of how people are going to use their time at the conference, but also how they're going to use the lessons and the knowledge they've gained at the conference to disseminate them when they return home. And home could be to a different organization, to a community, to an academic institution, to a program. So it's a combination of those things. So please go ahead and read more about what we're looking for in the scholarships section, and start looking at that. In terms of the when and the title, I think you can include the when in the title. You just don't have to. And generally, we're like, as Alberto said, we're looking for recent research, and it's presumed that the data is recent, and recent is intentionally somewhat vague if it makes it in, and so that the person can look up the when within the abstract. And so it's not quite as necessary in the title, because you're still wanting the title to be somewhat short.
I'll take one, Anna, if you don't mind, because it's a good way for me to specify something. Someone is asking whether there's a preference between British or American English. There is no answer to this. Well, there is an answer for JIAS, and the answer is, we prefer, British English. But the real answer is that every time you submit an abstract, either to a journal, so that the full article, or an abstract to a conference, you must read specifically the guidelines for that specific journal or that specific conference. You cannot believe how many times we get in the journal articles that are fantastic science, fantastically written, they just don't follow our guidelines. And that, unfortunately, is not a good sign, because we want the articles formatted for the conference or the journal that you're targeting. So you cannot submit an abstract that is, 200 words if the conference allows 300 words, for example, or vice versa. So that the answer is, please do take the time to check the guidelines of the journal or conference you're submitting to. I know it's time consuming. I know all journals have different guidelines, but it's key for you to do that. And then I will respond to another question. It's about plagiarism with artificial intelligence. Well, if you ask ChatGPT something, the ChatGPT will not give you exactly where it has taken that piece of information from. So you're going to copy paste that, but our software will be able to find exactly what the source of that information was and could flag that as plagiarism. So we really recommend that you do not use artificial intelligence. If you happen to use it to develop your study, not the study, sorry, to develop the writing of your abstract of your study, then you must disclose it. And then it will be up to the editor to decide whether the extent that you used artificial intelligence is acceptable or not. Most cases, the answer will be no, it's not acceptable.
So just to pick up where Alberto left off, I would highly recommend, if you're interested, and we hope that you are, in submitting an abstract to the IAS 2025 conference, that you visit the IAS 2025 abstract website. This will give you much more detail than I just rushed over. Someone has asked what the word limit is. I actually forget, and I don't want to be misquoted, so I would go and look that up. I also know that you can submit a table or a figure, and then that counts towards the word limit. So check that out. Also on that site will be information around co-submission. And what I mean about co-submission is whether or not, what the rules are around which other conferences you can submit the work to at the same time, or what you should do if an article is under peer review, but you want to submit the abstract. All that detail will be there. In regards to the question on what makes a good e-poster versus an oral, that is related to two things. So the first is that you will get 3 scores from the 3 peer reviewers, and then that aggregate score will go to the track committee. It is then the track committee's decision, and these are all external people, as to what abstracts will be presented as oral abstracts and what won't be. And they will look at a combination of that aggregate score along with what is the most pressing and relevant issues in their track that they want to make sure are spotlighted at the conference. So it is, there is a degree of subjectivity there, just in the same as that there's a degree of subjectivity over what is the most important research. I'm looking for other things, and actually I've just seen that we've ticked over to the top of the hour, and so it's actually going to be important for us that we go to the next slide and just say thank you. You've been receiving a number of messages from our colleagues, and this webinar will be available to stream in the days and weeks ahead if you want to go back and check something or share it with your colleagues. And as mentioned, please do take the time to fill in the survey. Let us know what we did well, what we could do better on, and what other content you'd like to see in a future webinar workshop of the Journal of the International AIDS Society. Thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day and good luck.